What if the problem isn't you? What if you're in the wrong room? My suspicion? You're not broken and you don't need to be fixed. You've outgrown where you are. Let's get more space and freedom to redesign the life you deserve. Welcome to the Reinvention Room. I'm Allison Hare, podcast launch strategist for ambitious leaders, and we are rethinking everything we've been taught. Part pop culture, part real talk, and all smarter ways to live life on your own terms. Whew, I'm excited to get into this one. When I first started podcasting, I really thought that if I just flipped on the mic, spun up my charm, brought on great guests, and had great content, I would just have sponsors beating down my door and the money would just roll in. It's not really how it works. And I think when you are looking for guidance around how to make money at podcasts, there are a lot of people that will tell you they'll kind of give you some vague advice. Grow your downloads, find a sponsor. But nobody's really breaking down exactly how or being transparent about what really moves the needle, especially when your audience isn't huge yet. So today I'm laying out 7 real ways you can make money podcasting. I have tried it. I've refined it in my own business, as well as supported other podcasters' growth using a lot of these methods. And in most cases, without needing tens of thousands of listeners. So by the end of this episode, you're going to have clear, actionable steps that you can take right away to monetize your podcast in a way that feels authentic, it feels manageable, and it feels aligned with your goals. And honestly, here's what this is really about. You are going to be surprised because this is going to help you figure out where to pursue and what to leave on the back burner so it makes your time and efforts and focus way more efficient. Let's get into it. So I wanted to open on a story. So I started my podcast in 2019 and I did it kind of on a whim. Actually, I was responding to a promotional email about a podcast workshop and I thought, yeah, I'll do it. I had no idea what I was going to talk about. I had no idea. I had no business to speak of. I was working in the corporate world, but I knew I had a lot to say and I knew I had an impact that I wanted to make and trusted that if I pursued this path and had the guidance, I would figure it out. And that's exactly what happened. And I left my corporate job in 2022. So I had already been podcasting for 3 years consistently. I had interviewed notable people like Seth Godin, Jesse Itzler, Mariel Hemingway. It was really exciting and very, very promising. And throughout that whole time, I had done a series of advertising where I was the advertiser, whereas I would have sponsors and ads on my show and had a lot of things going on. When I left my corporate job, I left with no plan on purpose. I don't recommend this approach. I was profoundly burned out of the corporate world, and I knew that a podcast was my avenue, was my ticket, right? And so I had gone to a podcast conference. It's called Podcast Movement. I think it is the biggest one in the world. And so they have multiple events a year and all over the world. And I'd gone to this podcast event and I was like, all right, I don't have a job. I don't have any income. I have no business, literally, and no idea. Do I need to go get a job? Do I need to build something first? But I knew I had this podcast and I'm like, all right, I've got the time. I'm going all in. So I went to this podcast conference. And good Lord, I felt like complete shit at this podcast conference. Honestly, it was so crazy because I'd been to a lot of them before. I love them. And there are really, really notable people. And Audie Cornish was there, Mark Cuban. There were so many incredible, notable figures that were there. But most of the breakout sessions and the teachings were around monetizing your podcast and really around growing your downloads. And I think at the time there really were maybe three primary ways to make money at a podcast. One was through ads and affiliates, and we'll talk more about that. The second one is through sponsorships, meaning somebody, you could have a brand that sponsors your podcast where they pay kind of a lump sum to be the presenting sponsor for shows. And the third way is through your own business, is marketing your own service. And so at the time, most of the focus was on really large shows, getting network ads, affiliates, those kind of things, of having sponsors like, Tide ads and AG1 and all of those things. And I have a middle tier show. It isn't a brand new show, but it's not a massive show like you hear about with Smartless and all of that. And so as a middle tier show, I'm at the point, especially in 2022, where it wasn't nothing. It wasn't that I didn't have any audience, but it wasn't quite to the threshold where I could make a living at it. And I'll give you kind of a breakdown of numbers here. I want to talk about for a second about like ads, right? Having ads. When you listen to any of your favorite large podcasts, they usually have a ton of ads. And normally, in order to make a living, you need to have, like 100,000 downloads per episode. You can make a decent living. You can start to consider that. But keep in mind, the average podcast has 400 downloads. Average, 400, 100,000, 400. Mine is somewhere in the middle, right? It's not, I think you can start talking to, or advertisers will start looking at you when you have over 5 or 10,000. But the payoff isn't a ton. So we'll get into the numbers around that too. And I had been connected to somebody at this podcast conference. I'm not going to say who, but I was connected to somebody that really you can pay this person and their company to help your podcast go viral. And so I really considered it. I really, really considered it, where essentially what they would do is they would help you craft your messaging. They would essentially kind of shadow you for a month. They would understand, and kind of almost like, this is before AI, not AI, but like ChatGPT would kind of have that machine learning. They would essentially have people learning, where they would follow me for a month and identify, like, how do I think? How do I talk? What's important to me? What are the things that I believe in? What are the things that I don't believe in? It was really interesting and kind of seductive of having an opportunity to do this. But when I left this podcast conference, I felt like absolute shit, because I'm like, how am I going to do this? I don't know how to grow at the pace that I want to grow, where I can replace my income or really make this the focus and the lead. And keep in mind, like, ever since I was in college, when I was in college, my dream was to be on radio. And I was a broadcasting major, and I have a degree in broadcasting. And I was somebody that was kind of an average student always. I was never the best, never the worst. And when I got into college and I took my first voice and diction class, it felt like all the lights in my body came on at once. It was like Wizard of Oz, where it went from black and white to true Technicolor, where I was like, oh, this is where I belong. And I found that my college had a radio station, and I became DJ of the year every single year that I was in college from this. And I just loved it. But as a sidebar, and I talk about this a lot, but my mother was a stay-at-home mom of 6 kids. And she would tell me and my sisters constantly, Allison, never rely on a man to make money. Always make your own. And so because my mother said that almost as a warning, because she did not make those choices and paid for it severely the rest of her life when, my parents divorced and a lot had happened. So for me, something switched in my brain where I was like, okay, that will never happen to me. I am always going to pick the money. And so I always put the creative self on a shelf and kind of told myself, well, you can't make money in radio. They don't pay a lot. And I did pursue that avenue to go into radio. And I sent like 7 pies of pizza to the radio station with my demo and a resume on top. And they laughed, they appreciated it, but they're like, no. And if you heard the demo tape, you'd be like, girl, what the fuck? It was awful. And I kind of abandoned it and just always picked traditional, I went into marketing. And then when I moved to Atlanta, went into sales and have been in sales ever since I was 25 years old. So, and spent my career in corporate sales. So all of this to say, there was a big component of the money aspect of it, of how can I make money? How can I make money? Without compromising what I had already built with my podcast, which I deeply and dearly love, and also love my audience who have some people have been with me since the beginning and are growing with me. And I love interacting with you. I love interacting with my listeners and feel so grateful about it. And it made me realize that when I left that podcast conference, that it made me realize that I am not going to let anybody take away or tell me that I am not worthy because my show doesn't have enough numbers for those big things. But I knew I was doing something important. I say all this to say that you need to kind of figure out why your podcast exists and what does success look like for you. And what the world was telling me, or at least the podcast world was telling me, you need to focus only on downloads. And I'm here to tell you, no, there are other ways. And that's what we're going to be unpacking today. I did talk to, I know the story is meandering, and then I'm going to get right into the meat of it. So thank you for this. In this podcast conference, I had met somebody who was promising to help me go viral. They were going to follow me. They were going to help me build something. And I kept asking, wait, even if my podcast goes viral, how do I turn this into money? How do I know that I can turn this into money? Because I didn't have a business. I didn't have anything. And they couldn't answer. It was like, well, we can get you these downloads and then you have the opportunity to negotiate. And really, truth be told, with this particular group, the way that they were doing it, they were literally socially engineering engagement. And essentially it was using humans to post and to grow on LinkedIn and to, it was predominantly through LinkedIn to drive traffic to my podcast, but it was almost falsely socially engineering engagement. And it would have cost me, I'm just going to have you brace, $16,000 a month, 16 grand a month. Is that normal? Probably not. And, for a minute, I thought about it and it was very seductive of like, well, what else am I going to do? And I didn't have an income. I had zero income and no idea what I would do. I took another turn and I'm so glad that I did. And in the meantime, I found Brand Builders Group. And so Brand Builders Group is a personal brand strategy firm. I actually am part of the team where I help them out with intro calls and I help support them as a subject matter expert in their community for podcasting. It's an incredible company. And I'm so glad that I worked with them, that I was, I started out as a client of theirs for 2 years, where I built my entire business from scratch with Brand Builders Group. So I'm so glad that I did that. It felt so much more authentic, and it felt so much better to actually build with a foundation versus smoke and mirrors. Let's help get downloads and bots, or, whatever it is, human people that are going to kind of falsely drive engagement on my stuff that I didn't even have any thought leadership built out at all. And so the personal branding side of like growing that is critical. So I wanted to share that to help you understand, like, I get, that people come to podcasting from all different perspectives. Some are looking for it to be a money driver, a lead generator. And so I always work with my podcasting clients, and I always start with the 4 Ps. And so I'm going to quickly go through this, and I'll probably do an episode where I'll unpack it. But there are 4 Ps to podcasting that require some thought and intention to make sure that your podcast, A, is really good, and B, has sustainability. Like, you're going to be excited at episode 30 and 50, and so will your listeners. And so the first P is purpose. What is the purpose of your podcast? Is it, and this is answering the question, what is the primary goal of the podcast? The primary purpose of the podcast, is it to be a lead generator for your business primarily? Is it for trust and credibility, which is really important? Most people, I would say, start there. Is it a high value networking tool where maybe you want to get some of your dream clients on as guests as your podcast, or have more meaningful conversations where it helps you widen your social or business network in a really intentional, thoughtful, smart way? And the fourth way is you just want to get your story out there. You just want to get your idea out there. Now, your podcast could be all 4 of those things, but one of those is going to be primary. And depending on which one is primary, literally shapes your show for you. So the first P is, what is the purpose of your show? What is the primary purpose of it? The second thing is the person. Who is the person that you are talking to? And note, I don't say people, because the audience could be everybody, but you want to talk to one person. It helps you connect with them, and you will attract people that are outside of that avatar. But who is the person you're talking to? What is the premise of your podcast? What is your unique perspective that you're bringing in? And the fourth thing is, what is your promise? Meaning, what is the promise that your ideal listener is going to walk away with every single time? And I think about it as like a packaged promise. So I think about it as like a snack, right? If you go past your pantry, you take out a bag of Doritos, you can either eat it yourself, you can share it. You want something that is packaged well, where somebody can share your show or share the ideas. And so that may look like, from a promise perspective, it can look like sharing an actionable takeaway. It can be for somebody to laugh out loud. It can be for you to share an equation or a framework. So it can be a number of things. For my podcast, I want every time that you walk away from my podcast that you have a conversation starter, that you can talk to somebody of like, hey, I was listening to this podcast and I never thought about it this way. Like, I want the water cooler talk to be high, right? I want it to be on fire for you, it's great at parties too. So I wanted to frame the 4 Ps, but let's get into the first way that you can make money, and that is through sponsorships and ads. So I talked about this before, that from a money numbers perspective, it does typically require that you have a consistent number of high downloads. So this can be a potentially very lucrative way to make money, especially with consistent high downloads. You want to be thinking of 5,000 and up per episode. But again, if you're looking at larger downloads, then obviously it allows you to have larger paydays for that. And it can help you build credibility if you're aligned with your audience. Now, from a con perspective, the challenge with sponsorships and ads is that it requires consistent high download volume for significant income. And one of the things that can be challenging is that if you have a sickness or something where you aren't able to record, it almost holds you a little bit beholden to the schedule, because you need to be beholden to the advertisers that are expecting a certain number of impressions for that to be run and for you to get paid. So the other risk is that then audience can feel a little bit sold to if it's overdone, and there is something to be said about advertisement placement of where in your show where it just gets too much. And so having it kind of put in a crafty way can really, really help. You can also have host-read sponsorship and ads, which will pay you more than that. So an average is $25 of cost per, they call it CPM, cost per thousand downloads, cost per thousand listeners. So they might pay you $25. So if you're kind of on the lower end, it may not be worth it, right? Like it may not be worth it to have ads throughout your show if you're only getting paid a couple of bucks at the end of the month, right? And so you want to kind of weigh out the pros and cons of that. So that's the first thing, are sponsorships and ads. The other thing about sponsorships, so ads are different than sponsorships. What's great about sponsorships specifically, so ads are like, again, if you have Tide that's advertising, or a big retailer that is advertising. It's always funny to me, like when I listen to Armchair Expert, which is Dax Shepard, he always is advertising, or they're always advertisements for feminine products because they have a predominantly female audience. And so you always want to match up your audience with the advertisers. Obviously, if you have a health podcast, you're not going to have a cigarette ad on there. You want to make sure there is alignment with that. But from a sponsorship perspective, you don't need a ton of downloads to get really great sponsors. What helps is if you have a niched audience, or if you niche your audience. So if you have a small podcast talking about, I don't know, like my friend Brian would always talk about like zookeepers. Maybe you have a monkey food sponsor that wants to listen to that because they're the audience, the people that are going to listen to a zookeeper's podcast. So it is really good to be very niche. I always love, I have somebody that I helped. Her name is Rachel Acosta. She's a client of mine, and she has the podcast, A Beautiful PA Life. She's a physician assistant. And so she made a podcast specifically for physicians assistants. And it was about kind of, giving great medical care, but also avoiding burnout. And so that's a great sponsor, it's a great opportunity for sponsors that can really support people in that industry. So that's sponsorship and ads. So let's get to the second one, which is listener donations, that you can literally set up like a buy me a coffee kind of thing where people can just pay you. You can, a lot of times what that can look like is you can say, hey, I am an independent creator and your support helps me continue to make content like this where I can keep bringing it to you for free. I am so appreciative of anything that you can send my way. So there are a lot of podcasters that will kind of leverage that. And there are a lot of different platforms that can help you do it and make it easier. The pro is that it's accessible for podcasts of any size, and it creates deep audience engagement and loyalty. The challenge with listener donations is that the income is often unpredictable or lower without consistent listener incentives. And it may require ongoing work to maintain supporter interest and continue to deliver value. The third way, and this is like probably a better step from listener donations, are paid subscriptions. So this can be a format like Patreon or Substack. And the pro is that it can give you scalable revenue, even with smaller engaged audience, and predictable monthly income. Because generally speaking, if you have a subscription, people may pay $5 a month, $3 a month, $10 a month, $25 a month, depending on what you offer behind the paywall. A podcast that's doing this really well is A Little Bit Culty. And so A Little Bit Culty is run by Sarah Edmondson and Nippy Ames, her husband. They're a husband and wife team. They were part of the NXIVM cult. You know, I love me some cults. But this was a big, big cult. And it started out as like a personal development cult, NXIVM. Started out as a personal development group, rather like an education group, but ended up turning into a full-blown cult and sex cult as well. It was horrifying what Sarah and Nippy and that whole group went through. And Sarah and Nippy were one of the whistleblowers that literally brought the whole cult down and put the cult leader, Keith Raniere, behind bars. If you're interested in that kind of thing, you can go on HBO Max. There is a docuseries called The Vow that is documenting all of that. So it was a really incredible, remarkable story, especially because it had attracted so many celebrities. So it had a lot of notoriety. And generally speaking, it's very, very, very difficult to prove and put a cult leader behind bars. And they were able to do it. And a few years ago, they launched a podcast called A Little Bit Culty. And it is designed to help people either recognize or get out of cults. And then, of course, it is so fascinating as well. Sarah is a good friend of mine, actually, and she is coming on my podcast in a few weeks, which I'm very, very excited about, and can't wait for you to meet her. But their podcast has a really large, engaged community built on Patreon. So Patreon, again, is kind of like a GoFundMe sort of, but a subscription service that you can subscribe to it. And in exchange for whatever your donation is, there are like tiered levels of what you can get. You can get branded merchandise of A Little Bit Culty. You can get access to the community where you can engage and add resources and support. You can get behind the scenes things that are not available for free in the public. You can get opportunities to get connected with the host of it. And so they have a really, really engaged one, and it helps you go closer to it. So again, the pros, it's scalable, a scalable revenue model, and it isn't required to have a massive audience. It gives you predictable monthly income. The challenge to it is that it is a high expectation to produce consistently valuable, exclusive content. And it adds it can add significant workload to your regular podcast schedule. I did Patreon for a little while. And I think for me, the workload was too much to justify, the people that I had gotten, who were so amazing to support it, but I couldn't provide a lot of extra at the time as well. I just didn't have the team at the point to support it. And so for me, it didn't make sense to continue to do it, but it is a great opportunity to grow when it is right for you. The fourth way is to sell your own products or services. In my opinion, this is the best way, truly the best way. What's great about your podcast of selling your own products or services is that it's independent of download numbers, and it's great for building community, and it provides tangible brand awareness and loyalty. So you may notice, and I can do it for you right now if you want, but all of my podcast episodes have what's called a mid-roll. And the mid-roll is where you want to showcase your offer, your paid offer, your main thing that you offer, service, whatever it is. And in the middle of your show, you can say, hey, it's Allison. Thanks for listening. Did you know that the ideas shared on the show is something I can help you with in real life? And if this is something if a podcast is something you're interested in, you can schedule a free clarity call with me at AllisonHair.com/free call. And so there it is, right? Like I'm literally doing my mid-roll live for you. But having that kind of structure of, hey, did you know that the idea shared on this show is something I can help you with in real life? And so that could be for your download, for your course, for your services, for merchandise that you might offer, or maybe you have an upcoming masterclass or a free opportunity to connect with people. That's where you do it. And so what's great about selling your products and services is that your podcast is a natural credibility builder for you. It is where you solidify your reputation. I will talk about this until I am blue in the face. And the reason why is because, like our focus and the world's focus tells us you need to be on social media. You need to post every day. You need to hook them in 3 seconds. You need to be on all the platforms. It can be really exhausting and daunting. And the reason why, and if that, kind of gives you heart palpitations, or you've been there where you're like, I'm posting, I'm doing it, but I'm not seeing any, real traction here. There's no momentum. What am I even doing here? It is a common thing. And the challenge is that you can't sell a $15,000 program or a high ticket offer off of 1 7-second, really clever, really well produced reel on a platform you don't own and an algorithm you can't control. The challenge with the social media, while social media is important, the where it shortfalls, what you're trying to do from a business perspective, is that it requires building of trust over time. They need to see, like you might hook them, and it is great for hooks, right? Like what? Where you want to stop a scroll where they're like, what is that? Oh, that's me. But they're not going to drop 20 grand, right? Like they're not going to go, yeah, this is exactly it. They're going to go look at your website. They're going to look at other posts. They're going to make sure they're going to stay with you a while because we're savvy. You're savvy, right? Like you're not going to be duped. And I have been guilty of being seduced really by people that sound really shiny and feel like they're talking to my heart, but you peel a layer back and you're like, woo, no, that does not feel aligned. And that is what is missing with social media, even though it is incredibly important. Because it gives you visibility. It gives you a hook, right? Like you're just looking to bring them in, right? What the podcast does is the podcast allows you to unpack who you are, what you believe in, how you serve, what's broken, your wisdom, your experience, your knowledge, your perspective, your particular lens on the world in 3 dimension, where you literally could sell a $10,000 program off of one tight 25-minute strong conversation with a clear and strong call to action at the end of it. Essentially an invitation for them to connect with you. Not like, hey, follow me on social media. You don't have a way to track that. You want them to get in your ecosystem, whether that is to sign up for a call with you or get on your email list, a way for you to engage one-on-one, and giving them an opportunity to do that is really imperative. So the con of selling your own products or services, that and again, if you have merchandise, that is part of it too. And if you do have merchandise, there are upfront costs. There's a lot of overhead. There's inventory management, unless it's using print on demand. And it requires some marketing and creative effort for appealing designs to make sure that is. But selling your own products or services is my number one way, and what I teach my people to do, because you can start making money right away from that, because you're building trust in through how you conduct your show. Number 5 is affiliate marketing. So I'm sure you've heard that, like, hey, for BetterHelp, right? I'm not a sponsor for that. They aren't a sponsor of the show. They have been at one point when I did have traditional ads on my show. But if you sign up for BetterHelp.com, put in the promo code reinvention and get 10% off, or get your first session free, whatever that is. That's what affiliate marketing is. What's good about affiliate marketing, that it's accessible even with a moderate audience size. And, it can offer some passive income once it's properly set up. The negative side of it, the downside, is that the revenue is often really modest unless your audience actively buys your recommended products. And that is something that requires you to test and measure. And maintaining authenticity can be very tricky, especially if the product doesn't fully align. We had to talk, that part is kind of obvious, but again, there are some audiences, and even me being on certain shows, I've noticed this too, where I can go on a podcast and they have a really big following, and then I'll promote my offer and it will be crickets. And then I'll go on another podcast that has maybe the same exact type of audience, and I will promote the same exact offer, same exact message, and I'll get a ton of people reaching out. And so part of it is identifying what is your audience going to buy, and you continuously speaking to your audience, talking directly to them, being a trusted partner. That is where the podcasting really, really has legs. Number 6 is live events and speaking gigs. And what's so cool about this is that post-pandemic, people are deeply, deeply looking to connect in real life. And they are looking for experiences that are unforgettable. And what I have seen is that there are so many shows that are now going on the road. And what's great about it is that you don't necessarily need to have a massive audience. Certainly to build a huge, to fill a stadium or to fill a huge auditorium or venue. Yeah, you probably do. But you can meet up. I've seen meetups where they do kind of coffee shop live events throughout the nation or throughout areas where they see listeners. So if you have a podcast, you'll notice that in the back end of your podcast that it'll show you the geography of where people are tuning in. It's always exciting. Like when sometimes my kids will ask me to put up my analytics because they want to see where in the world people are listening to me. And they're always like, wow, there are people listening all over the world to Reinvention Room. And for them, that's impressive. And it's impressive to me too. I'm always so excited about it. But you can also kind of break it down by state if you're in the US, or where, kind of the areas of where you're looking for. So there can be excellent income potential and strong brand building opportunities when you do live events and speaking gigs. And it deepens the relationship with your audience. Again, you see this as the theme. The negative side of this is that it's heavily dependent on geographical location and listeners' willingness to travel. And so, and it's extensive logistical planning, promotion, and upfront costs or risks involved, especially as you are starting out. So I always recommend with live events and speaking gigs to start small, and grow from there and just get connected with your audience, and I would encourage you, if you've got a podcast now, why don't you set up a time, let's say 45 days from now, and do a meetup in the town where you live, and see how it goes, and offer something exciting and special, or something that would really give a lot to you, or you feel like your listener would get a ton out of. And I think even just having something different, I think it gives you a creative way to really express yourself and connect with your audience in an unforgettable way. The seventh thing, this one is kind of newer, and I have not done this myself, but I love it. And it's licensing and repurposing. And so what's so cool about this, it is a way to license your content that can be repurposed as potentially, like I'll give you an example. Scam Goddess is a really popular podcast that is turning into a streaming unscripted series. So super exciting to look for opportunities like that. And opportunities like that, I would recommend, kind of branding your show in a way. Like you can pitch your show, whether it is at podcast conferences or podcast meetups, and you can even look in your community or in your area to see are there podcast meetups, and you'll notice that there probably are. And so the more you get connected with the podcast space and the people in it and people that are running it, gives you more opportunity to pitch your show for growth or for ways to repurpose or potentially do content licensing with other groups where you partner. So they're like strategic partnerships. So what's great about that is that that sounds exciting, right? Maximizes your content lifespan, little reliance on current download numbers, and it's potentially significant revenue if the content is valuable and evergreen. I think one of the cons is that it's often overlooked and underutilized and requires a lot of strategic planning and pitching and building relationships with licensing partners. So certainly there's a lot more legal aspects of it to be able to make that work. So those are the 7. So let me review them. Number 1, sponsorships and ads. Number 2, listener donations. Number 3, paid subscriptions. I love that one. Number 4, my favorite, selling your own products or services. Number 5, affiliate marketing. Number 6, live events and speaking gigs. And number seven, licensing and repurposing, content licensing. It's exciting, right? So I'm curious, what are you going to do with this? And what I really wanted you to take away from this is the things that are like, my thought was that you're going to come into this show, you're going to come in listening to this episode thinking, I really want to focus on I want to focus on just growing downloads. And then when you realize, wait a minute, there may be an easier way to do this, where I always say, focus on relationships over downloads. And I always tell my new podcasters, don't even look at your analytics for like the first year. Just focus on engagement. I would much rather that you are not chasing downloads or bots or whatever it is. Certainly do not pay for listeners. Do not pay for like bot listeners. There are ways to advertise, which essentially is, paying for listeners. That's for another time. But I like truly the real magic to a podcast has everything to do with the connections that you make. And obviously you need to make a great show. You need to make sure it's compelling. You need to make sure it is unique to you. And, the biggest thing, and this is what I teach with my clients and where most people miss, is they're so focused on like, let me just get the content out there. And what my focus on is not only do we want to get the content out there, we want to bring the audience into part of the story, not just, I'm just going to feed you what I want, right? We want to bring the listener experience into the show and bring your business in. So that way it doesn't feel like they are completely separate and this is just some fun thing that I'm doing. Because the challenge is, if it is just some fun thing that I'm doing, but in the back of my head, I'm waiting for the podcast fairies to smile on my podcast and, like Beyonce dropping an album at midnight, that people are just going to be excited and tell all their friends. It requires strategy and thought beyond just, let me just get that title and get those first few episodes out there. It needs a strategy and it needs the audience and the listener to be brought in. And most people are kind of just focused on the beginning part of like, as long as I'm consistent, and that can help. But usually like better rounding your show, a lot of times people come to me where they are, like they're just a degree or two off. They just need the bolts tightened in. So from a coaching perspective, I offer two opportunities. One is to help somebody launch a podcast. I do it over 12 weeks where I help them from soup to nuts, where they go from the very beginning, where we cover everything, all of the how do you make a great show, the promotion, the strategy, your idea, making it irresistible and making you unforgettable, and the ideas that you share, the people you bring on. That is one option. The other option is that I do a half-day private intensive that's, probably great for rebrands and relaunches. All of that is on my website at allisonhair.com. And if you are interested in pursuing like, hey, I'm not sure, but I'd love to have a conversation about it, get on a free call with me and let's see. It's allisonhair.com/free call. I know that there is a lot of podcast advice out there, but I wanted to give you real world strategies that actually work without spinning your wheels. For me, podcasting has transformed my business. It has expanded my network. It made showing up way more meaningful, and it has literally changed every aspect of my life. But I totally also get that figuring out how to monetize your own podcast can feel really overwhelming or fuzzy, especially when you're all up in your head wondering if you're doing this right. So let's take the confusion out and let's talk. But I would love to hear what stayed for you, or what you might add. What did I not cover, or what change your mind about something? So I invite you to DM me on Instagram, or you can email me at allison@allisonhair.com, or go on my Instagram account. It's Allison__hair, hair like the rabbit, not like what's on my head. And let's talk. Let's go mano y mano. Let's go one-on-one and see what's working for you. I always love to hear from you. And again, thank you. If you like today's episode, there are several ways to support the show. I produce this show myself, so it helps me continue to make it. First, please rate and review the show on the platform where you listen, and consider sharing this episode with a friend or five. That's how it grows, by sharing these ideas. Second, please sign up for my email, where I send out a short personal note to you every week, and always with a sprinkle of snark and some best finds. You can sign up at allisonhair.com/email. As always, thanks for listening and hanging out with me in the Reinvention Room.